Hi everyone, this is Josh VanBuskirk, and today we're going to be talking about pain and its relationship to movement. And the reason I want to talk about this is because movement can be such an undervalued and misunderstood therapy when it comes to these chronic nasty pain syndromes. And in order for me to be able to explain this effectively, I need to explain a little bit about some general neuro. And explain some general neurology principles so that we can get a better understanding of how this brain here works. And the first thing I like to tell people is that the brain is incredibly plastic. Not plastic in the sense that it's plastic like a child's toy, but plastic in the sense of those things that you repeatedly do, those electrical signals that repeatedly fire up into the brain and do their stuff up in the brain, they become more efficient and easier to perform. This is how that practice makes perfect comes into play, and this is also on the other opposite end of the spectrum with bad things. This is how addictions form. You keep firing those pathways that maybe, let's just say, have to do with alcoholism or let's just use alcoholism, and it becomes so. It's just hardwired into the brain where it's extremely efficient, and it cannot function without the stimuluses and the processes that come from alcohol. If that makes I can't even spell that, alcohol, if that makes sense. Second thing we need to understand is we need to take a look at what we are aware of. And now, I don't know if you've ever heard that saying. They sort of told you, it went around when I was little, where they'd say, Albert Einstein only used 10% of his brain. Did you guys know that? Did you know that? And I think that's totally bunk. That's not correct in any way, shape, or form. The only way I think that may even be applicable is that maybe Einstein and us were only aware of maybe about 10%, if we're really rocking, we got a really good brain, of what's going on. We're only conscious of about 10% of what's going on inside our brain electrically at any given time, because tons of stuff is coming, lots of signals are coming up into the brain via our nerves, up that spinal cord, from these different receptors that we have all over our body. And basically, they're all reporting to the brain and giving our brain information that it needs to use to calibrate and make responses and make actions and be involved with the environment around itself. So it's incredibly complex what's going around here, just incredibly complex. In order to handle that complexity, we can't be aware of everything. So if we were aware of everything that was going on, shoot, man, we would burn out and die. It's just a system overload type of thing. And so that's why we're probably only aware of about 10% of what's going on at any given time. So what does this have to do with pain? Well, actuality, it has everything to do with pain. Because honestly, we could be getting... now, let's talk a little bit about neurology, and I'll give you a couple of vocabulary words. Let's talk about this thing called nociception. If you ever took A&P, or maybe, I don't know if they teach in high school courses, they break down some of the what's called afferent stimulus, those electrical signals coming up the nerves into the brain. They break them up into two things. They call it nociception and proprioception. Nociception is usually stuff that deals with pain and damage. They're like the red warning signals going off that say, hey, your ankle's just been crushed. You need to be aware of this. Proprioception is a lot of the other things. It has to do with balance. It's all the receptors sending signals up to your brain saying, your body is in this position at this time. It's proprioception sending signals up to your brain right now that if you close your eyes, you're still able to know where your arm is in space. I can bend your arm this way and that, and you can tell me, yes, my arm is bent, or I can straighten it out, and you can say, yes, my arm is straightened out. That's proprioception. It's basically body awareness. And so where that comes into play is we have that 10% that we're aware of at any given time. And there's this thing called the gate theory with pain. And it's not so much a theory anymore because it's been shown to work time and time again. But what it means is that when we take those pain fibers, remember the nociception fibers, those nerves are firing up to the brain. Let's say you just stubbed your toe, and so they're firing up to the brain. What they found is that there's a bit of a competition between nociception and proprioception. There's a bit of a competition between pain and movement. And so we have all the movement signals coming in from your body. And the two can overpower each other. And this is the gate theory, saying that when we have a lot of pain shooting up to the brain, if there's a lot of movement, it tends to dampen the pain, tends to make it not so big, if that makes sense. So how does this come into play? Let me give you an easy example. You have your brain right here. Let's just say I take a hammer and bam. Oh, sorry, horrible color. Let me switch really quick. I'm hammering nails right here, and I miss the hammer, and bam, I just jack my thumb, my poor little thumb. And all of a sudden, I have all this nociception firing up. Now, if I were to ask you, what is the first thing you do after you just jack your thumb? You may not know this, but the first thing you do is you wiggle that thumb around like crazy. Unconsciously, what you're doing is by shaking your thumb around because it hurts, you're sending a whole bunch of movement signals up into the brain to cause a neurological response that decreases your pain. And this is it. This is the secret. Gate theory. And this is how chiropractic works. Is basically a proper chiropractic adjustment is a ton of movement stimulation being sent to the brain at one time. It's sort of like movement on crack. And so that they found with these chronic pain patients, what did they used to say if you were in a ton of pain? What were you supposed to do? Just go home and rest, man. Get off your feet. Let your body recuperate. Now we're knowing that that is not correct. Because when we go home and rest, let's say I did stub my thumb really, really bad, and they tell me to go home and rest, let's say they even put my thumb in a cast. Pain signals repeatedly fire and fire and fire, and if they put me in a cast, that means, you know what, I don't have that many movement signals going up to the brain. You know, they've dampened that movement out. And as a result, remember what I talked about plasticity? Those neurological pathways that we repeatedly fire become more efficient. And so let's say in 3 months' time, I take that cast off. What has happened to my body's neurology? What has happened to my body's nerves? What I have made is I've made a monstrous, if that can express monstrosity right here, I've made a monstrously efficient pain nervous system or a pain pathway in my brain, meaning that pain fires more easily. And then when this really gets bad is something called central sensitization. And you can look that up in Wikipedia. It's got a little bit. You can do a PubMed search on this and read the literature on this. But what happens is central sensitization is basically neurological pain pathways firing and telling the brain, hey, there's pain, when in all reality, there's no pain at all. And they've been linking this to stuff like fibromyalgia. To what are some of these other diagnoses they have? Even MS, you can categorize it more better than this. There's also, they call it hand-shoulder syndrome or shoulder-hand syndrome, reflexive sympathetic dystrophy. They all seem to have some of the same characteristics as the central sensitization. So it becomes pretty crazy. I'm going to take a quick break and I'm going to summon this up because we're about out of time for our little YouTube thing. So I'll be back in just a second to finish this.